Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, three-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Welcome, Zack Oates, the CEO and founder of Ovation. We're super happy for him to be here on the new show, No Instructions. Today we'll talk about what Zack has done in his career to get this business started, and really, hopefully, we can learn a little bit about how we can be creative about starting a business, and when and why and how, and just the intensity involved in getting off the ground.
Yeah.
You know, taking an idea to something real. And so, Zack, maybe you could kick us off by starting with how did you come to seeing this problem you're about to solve?
One of the big things I saw was, as I traveled around, I love traveling. I've been to 51 countries. It's
Wow.
It's one of my passions in life. And everywhere I go, people would be like, "Hey, can you review us on TripAdvisor?" And I'd be like, "Oh, sure." And I pull out my phone and I'd be like, "Oh, well, I don't have service. I'll do it when I get back to the hotel and connect to Wi-Fi." And then I did it, and then I would forget. And then I'd be like, "Oh man, I wish I had a way to remind me about this." And then if something wasn't good, I don't want to leave them a bad review, because I know that these businesses live and die based on online reviews. And so I was like, I wonder if there's a way that I can just tell them privately, like, "Hey, here's some issues." And so I thought about that for just years, of just remind me to leave a good review if I loved it, and let me chat with you privately if something went wrong. But it just was, I never really saw it out there.
So this was a problem that you kind of had seen and experienced for a long time.
Yeah, and it had evolved too. But once I got the idea down of a 2-question survey, that one, you can chat with them, one, it'll go and do things like leave reviews. Then I started seeing it everywhere. The need for this just started popping up everywhere I saw. And every restaurant I went to, every business I went to, there was just this need for some kind of honestly, it's like a real life chat tool. And I didn't see it. There wasn't, Podium wasn't around. These other companies weren't around yet. And
what year would you say this is?
I started tinkering with this idea in 20, let's see, what was it? It was 2011,
Wow.
2012.
Wow.
So it was a minute ago. And then, but it just never, I was like, oh, whatever. I don't need to do it. And then I saw Podium come out, and these other things were coming to town. So I was like, maybe I don't need to do this. But I still felt like there was an underserved market and a better way to do it. And so I drew it out on a piece of paper, and I carried that piece of paper with me for months. And I would just tweak it a little bit, draw a little doodle here, a little thing there. And then I called up one of my buddies. I'd actually started a company with him previously that we sold. It was an okay exit, but we had a lot of fun working together.
Yeah.
And
this wasn't your first time starting a business?
No.
Right? Okay.
No, yeah. I could tell you about that one. That was interesting. But I called up my buddy, and we'd already gone down to, I was living in Dallas, he was living in Austin, and I had gone down to Austin a couple times just to hang out with him for the weekend. We went camping and stuff like that. And then I called him up, I'm like, "Dude, we should get together, but we need to spend a whole day talking about an idea. And let's see if we could do it." So we did it, we talked about it. And at the end of the day, we had a name, we had a process, we had a plan, and we started executing on it. And that was November of 2016.
Wow.
So it was.
So Ovation as a name had come even in 2016.
Yeah.
And you stuck with it. You didn't rebrand this whole time.
No, this whole time.
Wow.
And it was always ovationup.com. And then the brand was always going to be Ovation.
Yeah.
Because we wanted something celebration.
Yeah.
We wanted something fun, something exciting. And Ovation is one of those names that there's a lot of things that are Ovation, no one in the tech space. And so we got the trademark for Ovation.
Awesome.
In the tech space. And the nice thing about it is everyone feels like they've heard of us. Ovation is like such a common word, like Ovation. I've heard about, no, not the hair care. Oh, but like, wait, Ovation, no, not the chocolates. It's like, there's so many different Ovations. But in the tech space, since there wasn't one, we just jumped on that. Now, Ovation.com, that was like $250,000.
Who owns that now? Do you know?
Some rando
Really?
who's just sitting
on it, sell it. Yep.
He started off at 250. Now he's down to 80K.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
wait till you raise a big amount of money and then maybe think about it.
Well, it's like, I don't need it though. Right. Because ovationup.com, it's like, that's them going to us. If I own ovation.com, then all these other people that are looking for the guitars, that are looking for the hair, that are looking for the chocolates are going to find me. Right.
So you had this idea, you've been stewing on it for a long time, writing it down on a napkin, playing with like how this might look, in time. And then you finally, get the guts to feel like, hey, I think we want to do this. And so you call your friend. What made you talk to your friend?
So there were like 3 developers that I've worked with previously that I just maybe 3 to 5 that like are just so good.
Yeah.
And I love them as people, and I respect their work, and they're awesome. And so I just like called the one that I worked with the most, and to see what we could do, because I think at the end of the day, when I was working for someone, and I had a great experience. I did my MBA, and then I was working for PwC, and at PwC I learned so much, and it was great, and I loved my time there. But on the other hand, I felt like, Chad, I think you get this feeling, but like it was like there was a hose attached to my soul that was just leaking out on the floor every single day. Do you know what I mean? Like
when you had a W-2 at PwC?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was like, for as much as I love what I'm learning, and I love the people that I'm working with on the client side and my side, it was like, I just knew it wasn't me. I was a fish climbing a tree, baby. And I needed to find my river. And when I hit that entrepreneurial stream, it was just like I felt so at home, because there's no limits, right? There's no like, okay.
But isn't it harder? Like, who do you complain to when you have a problem, right? Like
you.
Yeah, exactly.
I find a bunch of people like you, and exactly. I say, Chad, it's hard.
It's crazy. It's like, it's so cliche, the saying of like, you quit your 40-hour-a-week job to go work 80 hours a week, and sometimes it's 80, sometimes it's a lot less. But don't you feel like this major sense of freedom of deciding what to do next creatively?
Yeah, right. Where I'm not running through this whole filter of what would my boss say? How do I pitch it to this person? How do I make it through this scenario? The whole thing is just, what's the right thing to do to build value? And there's such liberation in that. And some people, they don't need that.
Yeah.
They don't need that ability to be an entrepreneur. I think that's awesome. I think that's totally fine. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with getting a job. I think that intuitively though, and innately, we want to create something.
Yeah.
Right? We're put here on earth to make our mark.
Right. And
I think everyone needs to have that ability, and regardless of if they're W-2 or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some people that need a little bit more constraint in their creative realm, you know, where they need a little bit more direction. And then there's some people that really need to kind of like feel the flow every day. You know, it's just kind of, go into it. So talk to me about, you got this idea, you put it together. Is this developer, does he become your co-founder, your first team member? And then at what point did you say, all right, let's start writing code and then let's test it?
So originally, truth be told, it was supposed to be an app.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a side hustle.
Yeah.
Ovation was never going to be my full-time gig. It was just going to be, hey, we'll build it up and people will buy the app and then, they'll
like
use
a mobile app.
It was going to be an iPad app.
Yeah.
And so, because the whole concept was just like an iPad screen, kind of like the Happy or Not,
right?
Except it was collecting more data and it was driving decisions.
Right.
And so we're like, that was the original concept of it. And it just took so much more work to get people to actually use it.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things as we looked at what do we need in this industry? Like, what do we need to be successful? That code base was like the first thing of like, well, we got to build an MVP of it. So we built that up in 2017. So this is like a few months later, I go and I moved to Salt Lake City.
Okay.
I was living in Dallas. I moved to Salt Lake City because I thought Utah is going to be where I want to start Ovation. I'll find people, I'll be doing my full-time thing, but this will be other people's full-time things.
Right.
By the way, that never works.
No, turns out that doesn't work.
So I had over one of my really good buddies, Scott Porter.
Okay.
And he runs San Diablo Churros.
The best churros ever.
So good.
Yeah.
Right? Wicked good, heaven sent. And he comes over for dinner once I move back to Salt Lake and we're catching up. He's like, what are you doing? And I was like, okay, well, I started this new job and they only make me work 40 hours a week. So with my other 40 hours of work, I am starting this company. And actually today we just launched the prototype of the app. And so I show it to him and he's like, dude, I need this right now. I was like, oh, well, this is just like the app front version. It's like, he's like, what do I need to do? Can I download app front? Like, I don't even know what that is. Can I download that? Can I put it on an iPad? I've got iPads right now. I want to use that tomorrow at my events. And so he did. Wow. We gave him access to like total test version of it. And he was obsessed. He started telling everybody about it. And he has brought us so much business. And it was just because like, I didn't even know that he was doing this churro thing at the time.
Right.
I was just catching up with Scott Porter, my good buddy.
Yeah.
And boom, it hits. And I'm like, wait a second. He's like really interested in this. And so meanwhile, I had brought on one of my friends who I grew up with in New Jersey. He was a few years younger than me. So we hadn't like stayed in close contact, but we knew of each other. We'd go to lunch occasionally. We bumped into each other at airports when on like flights back to Jersey.
Right.
And he was like, hey, I'm graduating and I'm looking to do something. I'd love to join a startup. And I was telling him about my startup. He's like, what if I joined yours? And so I had him coming on board and he was full-time. Scott, who was my tech guy, my tech co-founder, he was not full-time. I was not full-time, right? Scott had just sold his company, so he was in a buyout phase. I had started a consulting gig. I mean, it was full-time consulting with another company. And so it was like this very weird dynamic.
And you had now your first user.
And I had my first user who was obsessed with it. And by the way, he still is to this day. If you talk to Scott Porter and you're like, tell me about Ovation. Oh my gosh. Now, granted,
he's a great guy.
He could get excited about like carpet, right? But
and tacos.
Yes. But it was cool just to see such strong validation early on that encouraged me so much. But the problem was we had a solution and we were looking for a problem.
Did it feel like you had a point solution at this point? You know, sometimes you have some investors that say, well, I don't know if you have a company yet, but you have a product.
You have a product.
And that's it.
I didn't even think of it like that at the time. I just thought, who's going to buy this? And like, I didn't even know who would buy it because we didn't have a strong direction. It's not like I came out with this vision of this is like how we're going to be in 1,000 years. It was, no, we have like an app and like, okay, cool. This guy.
So are you starting to feel the pressure of like, okay, we've played with this thing. I called out to a buddy. My buddy built it real fast.
Zero pressure at this point. Because
Okay.
it's just like, we got some sales coming in, and Mike, who was one of the co-founders initially with us, gave him the title of co-founder, and he was out there selling stuff and servicing them himself. And then it was like, it was plugging along. And so it was just like totally fine. And like, it was whatever. And I didn't have any kids, and we're playing startup, and we're getting a couple $1,000, a couple $100. And then we got to the point that Mike was like, hey, we're like needing some help managing these customers. I can't sell and do it. And I'm like, well, it's supposed to be like a self-service thing. And he's like, well, that's not exactly how it's working. And so the problem in the beginning is I was detached, right?
So you were still keeping a regular job or long-term consulting kind of gig, right?
Yeah.
You weren't doing this full-time yet, technically.
No, not at all. I was actually, so my consulting job is I was working for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay,
and I worked at their headquarters in Salt Lake City.
Got it.
And they are like maniacal about getting people out of the building. And so at 6 o'clock, if you were in that building at 6 o'clock, well, at least when I worked there, it locks. The doors lock from the inside.
Wow.
You cannot walk out the front doors if you're there after 6 p.m. You have to walk all the way down to the garage, and then you have to walk out the spiral driveway to get out, because it's like the walk of shame. Like, how dare you work past 6 o'clock?
Not go home to your
family.
Go
home to your family,
You're
right?
like, wait a minute. I think I'm still single, right?
No, at this point I was married.
You were married.
I was married, no kids.
Okay. Yep. So my first startup, same thing, is kind of I didn't have children until the end. I actually had a son right before we sold the company. And I don't know, how did you feel about that? Was there some advantage to you? And at that time of your life, did you feel like you could work more?
When I didn't have kids?
Yeah.
I think that I didn't know any different.
Okay.
Because when I was working at PwC, I was writing a book, and then I published that book, and then I was doing tours on that book. And so I had a pretty big side thing. And then as soon as the tours and the book started kind of slowing down, that I wasn't focusing on that as much, I started focusing on Ovation and thinking around what could this be. And then, that took up a lot of my time in my free time. So like I was always working on something. So I was always working like 80 hours a week, but it didn't feel like it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about that. Why doesn't it feel like it? Why? I mean, are you a natural busybody, or do you feel like you were chasing something that really was meaningful to you as you started to get to this point of creating Ovation?
I mean, when I was creating Ovation, when I'm doing the book and things like that, it's like playing pickleball. Like, I don't look at pickleball as work, right?
Yeah.
I look at pickleball as that's an outlet. That's a fun thing. That's, working out. Like, that's how I look at the writing a book. That's how I looked at starting a company. It was like my fun thing I did on the side. That was my hobby. That was an outlet. My wife sewed. I started a business. Like, it just was kind of what drove me.
It doesn't feel unnatural to you. It's almost like you were describing, being a fish out of water. Honestly, like once you found the water, it's like, wait, here is where I belong. This is what I was built to do.
Exactly. Yeah. That's where I feel flow. That's where I feel excited. That's where I feel like, my purpose and my passion. And it does, like, now I'm definitely still excited about it. I love it. And, but I mean, it feels more like work now, because there's a lot of things that need to happen. There's fires that need to be put out. There's, like, right before this podcast, I got an email, and it was like a total facepalm email of like, oh my gosh, why did you do that? Like, so these are the types of things that I don't love. But man, when I'm mentoring a new company, when I'm in front of a group of restaurants and helping, like, seeing the lights click in terms of how do they improve their guest experience, like, those are the seconds that I live for, right? Those are like the things that give me so much drive. And when you find your flow, it's like there's kind of a wide and lazy flow.
Yeah.
and then there's a narrow and rushing flow.
Yeah.
And when I'm in my startup, it's like, yeah, like this is where I belong.
Right.
But when I'm doing things that I know that I was put on earth to do, it is just like, you know? And I think that a lot of people talk about flow as one thing. I don't look at it that way. Like there's degrees of flow. And I think that that's what's really key is when you find that, then just keep swimming around until you find what where the current really takes you.
Where it takes off.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that then, because I think that's a good segue going back to this point where you started to maybe inadvertently assemble a team a little bit, or find a need of like, all right, now you have one team member saying we need more people, and I'm working somewhere and I need to spend more time on this. Like, how did you make that decision? At what point did you say, all right, we're doing this?
So we had enough money to pay Mike, and then we were growing it, and then we needed someone to manage the clients that Mike could sell more. And we decided that we would bring on a part-time person from college. And we brought on this college guy named Derek. And so we started paying Derek because we had the money. And by the way, when we first started, Scott and I each put in an equal amount of money, right?
Perfect.
And that was kind of like, great, we've got, and I think at the time, it was like $15,000 each.
Okay.
So it wasn't like
enough to pay the Amazon bill.
Yeah.
Every month and a little bit of
because I
payroll.
mean, yeah, because I think about it, right? $30K, and then Mike was paid on commissions, and so he got a good chunk of the people we were bringing in. But in the early days, we were pretty break even because we were at such a low cost basis. And then we brought Derek in to be like our first non-revenue generating dollars in. And then things with Mike didn't work out. We still work with him because he actually works with Dirty Dough right now.
Oh yeah.
And Dirty Dough is a customer of Ovation.
Great.
Because Mike brought us in.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've maintained like a really good relationship. But it was kind of funny because through this whole process, like we brought in a couple of different sales consultants because Mike is like, he's a hustler, but he never built a sales team, right? Never built a sales structure. So we brought in 3 different individuals on consulting bases that we thought, hey, any of these people might be able to be our head of sales, because we realized that we needed somebody with we needed some structure there to the sales org
to grow it.
Yeah. So we brought in 3 people. The first person we brought in ended up, so he did a bunch of consulting for us, and then he ended up leaving and starting a competing company. And then he would like
always happen.
He would like go to our customers and be like, hey, we're like Ovation, but less expensive. And it's funny because, as we've been pivoting and making, changes and things like that, it's like he's never far behind us on a pivot. And it's just like, okay, like that's how
he's still operating today.
Yeah. Yeah. He's still operating today. Because he's got a really good salesperson, right? And he put that structure together. The other person we brought in didn't quite work out. He was more from the summer sales background.
Yeah.
And he'd put together like a 30-page sales manual. And I'm like, my man, I just need you to sell. Like, I just need you to learn how to sell the product. I don't need you to sit there and like pontificate on the manual. Because what does this manual even do? You don't even know how to sell it. Like, I don't even know how to sell it. Right. And then the third person we brought in, we ended up working with him. We hired him full time, and he worked with us for, almost 4 years. And that was, so he ended up building our initial base of the sales structure at Ovation, and we took that to like $1 million in ARR.
Wow!
But it was, but I will tell you, so of all those people, right? All those people, I talk about the 3 salespeople, Scott, Mike, Derek. I mean, there's a bunch of people that were involved in the early days.
Sure.
Now it's me, and it's Derek.
Who's Sal?
Derek is my he was that part-time college person that we hired.
Wow.
And we basically have the company, so I'm CEO, but then I also am CRO. So marketing partnership sales reports to me, and then he's CXO, which is Chief Experience Officer, and customer success, product, and engineering report to him. This is that early hire
part-time,
who we were like, oh yeah, just like, yeah, part-time college guy.
So you didn't go and get an MBA with the best, pedigree
for that
possible.
Derek has ended up being just an invaluable resource, and he has been such an incredible partner. And here's the principle of like where I'm at to this point in my life and in business. And I've realized that you got to stay alive and excited long enough to get lucky. And we got lucky with Derek. And he's been great. And he was in the early days, he almost left Ovation. He was doing job interviews in other places because when Mike left and we had no head of sales and Scott wasn't full time and I was still in the process of leaving my consulting job with the church, and he was like, what am I doing here? And it was wild. And then we got to like 5K of MRR.
Wow. And
I was like, okay,
you're a lot more than 5K in MRR today.
Yes. Today we're much bigger than that. But at 5K, I was like, okay, I can quit my job and do this. And keep in mind that throughout all of my consulting and with my former startups, I'd saved up a good amount of money that I put aside, and I called it my entrepreneurial fund. And I had a little over $100,000 in my entrepreneurial fund. And it wasn't in stocks, it wasn't in investments, it wasn't in 401ks, just cash in my bank account. And I told my wife when I was, quitting, when I stopped working at the church and I was like, hey, I'm going to do Ovation full time. I took that $100K and I said, and by the way, we had enough money at that time. It was going to be for like 4 months and a vacation, right? So we had enough 4 months and a vacation. I thought in that time I could go get a job and we'll find it. PwC said, anytime you want to come back, we're ready to hire you, right? So it was like, I felt like I at least had something, and albeit
if it didn't work out.
If Ovation didn't work out, what was my worst case scenario? I go get a 6-figure job doing consulting, and that's not so bad.
Yeah.
Right. I could provide for my family.
Right.
So I told her this $100K is what I'm going to put into Ovation. And I'll put that into Ovation by way of me paying rent for us, by way of us buying food, by way of, anything that if I need to invest more into Ovation, we've got $100K. And if when that $100K gets all the way to zero, we don't have a business that can pay us, then I'll go get a job and I'll walk away.
And how did it work out?
We got down to like $6,000. I mean, it was
that
dicey.
Must have been scary.
I mean, to her credit, Annie never once was like, never once. And we talked about our finances every single Sunday. Every Sunday we sat down and I would show her where the entrepreneurial fund was, right? So she knew exactly where things are at.
How did you think about expenses at the time? You've got a few employees, couple part-time people, 5,000 in MRR, and a nest egg to say, all right, I can pay our bills. I can now do this full time. Certainly taking a risk, right? Calculated risk, but taking a risk. How did you think about that? Was there a thought of fundraising at some point? Was there a thought of like, let's bootstrap this as far as we can or forever? Like, how'd you get into that space?
I kind of thought there's this magical 10K of MRR that I wanted to get to.
Okay.
Right. And once I got to 10K of MRR, I felt like, all right, we're like onto something. And people were paying us around $100 a month. So that was 100 paying customers. So if we get to 100 paying customers, like I'm going to be so stoked about this.
Yeah.
Well, so I quit my job, go full time. And at the time, we had no limitations on who you could sell to. We weren't focused on restaurants at the time. Restaurants were a big portion of what we were doing.
Right.
But if somebody came to us and said, hey, I like what you do and I want you to build this for us here, but we have these tweaks to make, we were like, okay, let's do it. And so we built those tweaks out. And so we were servicing so many different industries and we had so many different iterations of the product. And it was really rudderless, right?
Yeah.
It was just kind of like we're all selling stuff. But one of our big accounts was a summer sales company. And of the 5K, they represented 2,500. And Mike, I don't know how he did it. He got them to pay us like a 20 grand setup fee up front, which was like, I mean, we only had 30K to start the whole business. So 20K setup fee. We were like, wow.
That's awesome.
And then we had to build what they wanted. So we built it. And then at the end of the day, though, I started full-time at Ovation, and I hadn't really known a lot of our customers. So I was reaching out to try to understand where things were at. And they were like, hey, we're really unhappy with what we have. I go, why? And I had no idea what was going well, what wasn't. And he was like, well, here's all these issues. So I'm glad you called because we're going to cancel. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I remember exactly where I was in the airport on my way to a show. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. That's half of the revenue.
Oh,
and that was a real gut punch. And so we focused a lot on like just finding people. You know, I did tons of sales. I was calling every single day, just call. We would scrape Yelp so that way we didn't have to pay for lead lists. You know, we were using Google Sheets so we didn't have to use a CRM. Like we just were scrappy as scrappy can be. We were trying to find reps that were doing commission only. And like, it just was anything we could do to just like get things off the ground. And then we finally started to be able to pay a base and hire a sales rep. And then that started to grow. And then I remember we went to our 100th customer for lunch when we hit 10K MRR. And it was so cool to be there and be like, we're like on top of the world. We've got 10K of MRR.
How long did it take you to get from that point, from when you went full time to that $10,000?
It was like March, and then 10K was sometime that summer. Because once we hit 10K, relatively, right? Especially in
doesn't feel quick today.
Yes.
Then.
And so it felt like we were on fire. And so we started applying to these accelerator programs because I'm like, we need some money.
Yeah.
And we don't just need money, but we need someone to help us like jump to that next level. Cause I didn't really know how to raise money. I'd raised money before, but it was kind of like lucky that I raised money. I didn't do it purposefully.
Right.
So I wanted to join these accelerator programs. We got accepted into one and I just didn't feel good about it. Like it was too small. It was not like well known. And I was like, I want to go to a big accelerator. I want to go to like 500 startups now called 500 Global, or like Y Combinator, or like a big one, like a really big one.
So at this point, you know, you're gaining traction, you're selling, you're learning this can be a thing, you're improving the product, I'm sure, getting that feedback from people. And like, so, I mean, if you're wanting to go to Y Combinator or some of these others, you're probably seeing, all right, this isn't just a small widget that we're going to sell. Like this could be something big.
Yeah, exactly.
This could be something impactful and meaningful.
Yeah. And we started to see the vision of this bridge between physical businesses and these increasingly digital consumers. And that was kind of like the vision that started to come together more as we started to expand and see what we could be. And then we're at 10K of MRR when we got accepted into 500 startups. We turned down one of the startup programs because we're like, if we're going to do it, let's do it big.
Yeah.
And then we got accepted into 500 startups, which had, in our class, it was less than 2% acceptance rate.
Wow.
And so we got so lucky because I speak Russian and there was a guy there who was Russian, and we were able to connect a little bit, and he was like impressed that, you know, I spoke Russian And then I took this test and I scored really, really well on this like profile test that he believed in a lot. And so he was pushing us through so hard. Everyone there was like, I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, they're cool guys and like interesting product, but like, I don't know. And since he pushed us through, all because I did well on this test and spoke Russian, we got in. Wow. I remember the very first day, the head of the program came up to me and I'm in the kitchen and I'm like, hey man, just want to let you know, I'm like super grateful to be here. He goes, you're Ovation? I go, oh, yeah. And he's like, huh, just to let you know, and this is, by the way, day one of the program. He goes, just to let you know, if you would have sneezed differently in your interview process, you wouldn't be here. He was like, you're that close. I didn't even know. He's like, I forgot we even let you in. And then
I must have really advocated for you.
And then he just walked out. Like, that was the head of the program, right?
Wow.
And so the fact that this guy had advocated for us so much was what got us in.
Like
again,
how welcoming.
You're right. Yeah. And so then the rest of the time I was there, I was just stressed out of my mind, right? And Derek moved out to San Francisco with me. Keep in mind, my head of sales and my CTO are still not full time.
Wow.
Derek at this point was, because he'd graduated college, and he comes out to San Francisco with me, moves out there. And it was so funny because we were out there for like 2 weeks. And I was like, oh my gosh, Derek, we can't afford to have both of us out here. We're going to run out of money.
Right.
And now that I know what this program really is, you probably don't even need to be here full time. Like, you could Zoom in for a bunch of stuff. So right after he moved his small little family from Utah all the way to San Francisco, packed up all his stuff, got rid of this place. After 2 weeks, he moved all of his family back to Utah.
Wow.
And anyway, that
must have been hard.
It was hard for his wife to like me after that.
Yeah, but I'm sure. You still thank her now. I'm sure. Thank you, please.
Yeah. We're really good friends now. Like, we go on trips together. We go on double dates together. Like, right. I love Derek and his family so much. And like, they're just such great people. And, but anyway, that was a little dicey point.
I'm sure.
You know, but we made it happen. And we were down to, at one point, so that's when I was down, like my entrepreneurial fund. So we went there in October, and by January, my personal funds were at almost zero.
Wow. I
had a month and a half of runway left.
And at this point, though, in the accelerator, they provided some capital?
They provided some capital, yep. But there was something that I guess I'd missed in the orientation. Like, there was something I needed to fill out to get the money. So I'm there. Wow. And I'm waiting.
Where's the wire?
Where's the money? Where's the money? I'm seeing our Ovation bank account go down.
Yeah.
I'm seeing my personal bank account go down. Ovation at one point had $3,000 in the bank. And I had payroll to run in 2 days.
Yeah.
And I am just sweating bullets because payroll was like $6,000. Like, and I was out of money. I had no money. Ovation had no money to cover it. And so I realized, so I was talking to them, I was like, hey, by the way, so I think...
What about that money we talked about?
I'm just trying to rock my head. Like, I think there's some money involved here.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, yeah, why didn't you fill out the form? I'm like, form? Anyway, so we got it all figured out, and we got the money in a day before. It was like the day before payroll that we got the money in. And so we've been through like SVB, through that experience.
Oh yeah.
Through an investor who committed $2 million and then only wired us 200, and then trying to like re-raise that. We've never missed payroll. We've been 1 day late once, and that was with the SVB debacle. But
I think everyone was a day late.
Right? It was like
literally anyone who was there.
And everyone at Ovation was like super gracious about it. They're like, that's cool. We understand. But that was something that for me, payroll is just, there's nothing more important. I have to pay people. And that's why revenue, I'm like obsessive about my financials. At any point on my desktop, I have my financials up. I review my financials probably 10 times a month.
Yep.
Because I don't, I mean, like I was at we were talking about the importance of collections and not just of like new MRR, but right. I want to collect the MRR
Correct.
too.
Correct.
And so I said, we're at all hands meeting. I go, raise your hand if you're paid and contract signed. Raise your hand if you're paid in surveys taken. Raise your hand if you're paid in press releases we put out. Raise your hand if you're paid with money. I'm like, we've got to collect, right? We're not some charity service. And if someone's not paying, we got to boot them off, but we got to collect the money as well as sign people up. And we got to do that faster because that's what everyone's paid in. And it's really interesting to see how like a founder, if you don't have a finance background, you've got to get someone on your advisory board who does.
And maybe to even challenge that, if you don't have a finance background, find it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I learned this, the hard way, and just some of my previous experience in bringing in like really professional people who knew what they were doing. And there was actually a time in my company where my previous company, where I was relying only on reporting given to me as opposed to just like logging in and seeing the cash all the time.
Yeah.
And that is a bad habit.
Yeah.
Okay. And eventually it actually bit me in the butt. And so I think sometimes, when people go to start a business, they think like, oh, well, I'll just find somebody who knows that better than me, or I'll just figure that out. Now, if you're running $100 million business, yeah, that's probably the case. But when you're running a 50,000 MRR or ARR business, or $1 million ARR business, like you kind of have to at least understand
totally
a lot of things.
I mean, every single month I go through every single transaction still. And we just raised,
tell us where you're at now.
Yeah. So we have 3,300 customers that we're working with right now. We're at about 3.5 million ARR in terms of contracts. And it's cool. Like,
you should be proud of that.
Thank you. Awesome. I mean, I feel like the team that we have is just so good. My wife's about to give birth any day now.
Awesome.
And
congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm going to actually, for the first time ever, because my first kid was during Ovation, second one during Ovation, third during Ovation. This is the first time that I'm gonna like actually take a few days like totally off and just help my wife with the kids. And it's cool to have such an incredible team, great leadership team, great partner in Derek, who I could go and do that and, not worry and know that like the fires are going to get put out. Because one thing I always say is the backyard's always on fire.
Yeah.
And no matter how good that front yard looks, everyone knows the backyard's on fire, be it in business or in life. Like, don't get so caught up in the social media, Instagram or LinkedIn, that you are comparing other people's front yard to your backyard. Yeah. It's not healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people can learn, in building a startup. I mean, this is just an ongoing problem in social media in general. And you see this all over LinkedIn. LinkedIn's positivity center, which is great, but also the reality is not there on LinkedIn because nobody's, I mean, I can't say nobody, but few people are actually talking about the truth of what is happening and how hard it is. I mean, I've used this example multiple times, but we saw this huge exit with Divvy, right? A company here based in Utah, and they sold for over $2 billion. And, 9-10 months prior to that, they thought they might be going out of business and laid off, 2/3 of their company.
Right.
Can you imagine the demons that executive team was fighting at the time, right? Like how difficult is this going to get? But just like you said, I mean, you just have to stay in it long enough to get lucky, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways,
and you got to be excited too, right?
Yeah.
That's why I say you got to stay excited and alive long enough to get lucky. And the reason is because the alive part, that's where the finances come in.
Yeah.
You've got to be managing your finances so closely. Had I made one stupid purchase, I wouldn't have had the money to make payroll that December.
Yeah.
Right. Had, and the reason I look at every single transaction, and I know my investors right now are pushing me to stop doing that.
Right.
But, I'll Slack people, I'll see who made what purchase, and I'll Slack them. I'll just be like, hey, just trying to, understand, what is this one for?
Yeah.
And I'm not doing it because, and 95% of the time I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks. Just want to know for reporting purposes. But I want them to know that it's like, you should be spending money as if it's my money.
As if it's, or
right?
their money, right?
Or their money. But if they're bad with money, spend it as if it's mine, right?
Yeah, definitely. No, it's true. There's this one time, I was running my startup, and this was 5 years ago or so, and we had raised a Series A. We had a bunch of money in the bank, and so everyone was a little bit lighter with things, right? And I had some salespeople traveling to go to a trade show in Texas, and they had budget to buy certain things and do certain things, right? And they didn't maybe think they were using up all of their budget in one way, and so they decided to go out to dinner and spend like $2,000 at Ruth's Chris, right? Was that necessary?
Right.
Absolutely not. For a small startup, just because we raised money doesn't mean that we can be belligerent with the money.
And right? I think that's the thing, is that in no way do I want to sit there and like babysit people.
Yeah.
But I want to understand, right? Yeah. And when I'm putting these finances together, when I'm understanding where money's going and how it's going, like, I want to know where things are at. And I feel like one of the things is I finally talked to my leadership team, and I basically put out 3 goals. One having to do with MRR growth, one having to do with revenue collection targets, and one having to do with expenses. And I'm like, I'm talking to you about these 3 things because as I took a step back and I said, what are the 3 things that are most important to me? If I boil it down to 3 things, and in the business, that's what it comes down to: growth, cash, and expenses. And it's like, so when you ask me, can I spend this? Or when you spend something that isn't leading to revenue growth, right? Then like, why are we doing it? Now, there's this great book called Unreasonable Hospitality. And one of the things that we do in there, one of the things he talks about is this 95-5 principle. You just look at the 95% of your expenses and you track it and you slash it and you like take such good care of it. And with 5%, go crazy.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, we just wrote out the last 2 months, we've written commission checks that we just wrote the biggest commission check we've ever written. And I was so happy about writing this commission check. And it was a giant commission check. And I'm like, that's so cool. I'm like, literally my singular goal in life is to pay you more. Let me pay you more. And it's like things like that. Or like when we do our end of year holiday party, we go all out and we have a ton of fun and we do fun activities, and there's ways to spend money that isn't going to make a huge difference to Ovation, but will make a huge difference to the people who are receiving it. That's where you can splurge, right? But with all the other expenses, just be obsessive, because the second you run out of money, you're dead.
You're done.
And that's why the excited thing is really important, because you've got to be out there. You've got to be talking to people. You've got to be making your product better. You've got to be understanding, what do customers love about you? What do your employees love about you? What are the problems on the leadership team? How do we solve them? Like these things that you got to stay excited about.
Yeah.
Because if you're not excited and you're just like, well, just another day in the office, let's stay alive, you're not going to be out there enough to get lucky.
Yeah.
Because when you're excited and you're out there, that's when you get lucky, and you don't know where that's going to come from.
I think, also you have to be able to have the brain capacity to get through those difficult times, right? Like the backyard fires you're talking about, because they will happen.
Yeah.
Even when things are going great, then they don't go great.
And by the way, they are happening.
Yeah, exactly. Like it literally, some people say, oh, it's feast and famine as an entrepreneur, like, every day. And I say, well, it's every few hours usually, right? Like, all right, we had an awesome sales call. Then I got this crappy email from a customer, right? These are things that you deal with in building a startup. So
I went out to lunch with someone who's not an entrepreneur, and I was like, he's like, how are things going? I was like, well, we had to let someone go, but then we hired some, but then had to let someone go. We made an offer to someone who accepted it. The system went down for everyone, but then we got it back up again, and we've been able to, and then we just closed one of our biggest deals ever. And he's like, wow, it's a busy month. I was like, oh, no. That was this morning. that was today. Yeah. That's how it is. And
totally.
To ride that roller coaster is so emotional whiplash.
But it's also awesome.
Right?
It is seriously so awesome. Like I can promise those who do go out to start a business, like you're definitely not going to be bored. That's for sure.
Yeah. My first recommendation though, honestly, to everybody who wants to start a business, I just spoke at a entrepreneurial boot camp, and I was like the final keynote speaker of like this whole entire thing. And so it was me, and then the camp was ending. And I was like, all right. I was like, get everyone in there. We were chatting, and I was like, okay, I've got 5 pieces of advice for you. Are you ready for the first one? They're like, yeah. I was like, are you ready for the first one? Yeah. Click the slide, and it says, don't do it, period. And they were like, huh?
Yeah.
And I'm like, how hard do you think it's going to be? It's going to be harder. How sad do you think you're going to be? You're going to be sadder. How stressed do you think you're going to be? You're going to be stressedder. Like it is going to be so hard. But if you're going to do it, and if you still, after hearing about, I just like dove into how hard it was. If you're still going to be still interested in it, then you might have what it takes, because you gotta be a little crazy. I mean, literally, we going through the whole process of finding our head of sales that we have now. I've thrown up probably 4 times. I had to go to the hospital because I was like so stressed out. Mm-hmm. I've had numerous panic attacks, and that is just with finding one person at Ovation, and the process of going through finding the right person. And when you realize it's not the anguish of, having to part ways, and building up, like trying to rationalize yourself, like that you don't need to change. You don't need to change that person, and you don't need to like a different person in that role. And then, it was really stressful. It was the most stressful thing that's ever happened in my life, is our head of sales role at Ovation, just because the people that brought in there, like, I love them. They're awesome. But when you realize that it's not a good fit, it's just soul crushing to go through that process.
I'm glad you did it. It's cool to hear your story and hear where you've come today. And, as everyone can learn from this, there's no one way to build a business.
No.
There's no instructions on how to do this. And you really just have to figure it out along the way. And so thanks for taking the time to come on, and really appreciate that.
Dude, appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.